Welcome to Mission Minded, the podcast where we explore outside-the-box thinking in carrying out Christ's Great Commission. On this episode, we are joined by Bruce and Zach. Bruce and Zach serve at ITEC in the Mission Transportation Department, which helps find solutions by providing advice, consulting, and strategizing for transportation in remote areas that may be needed for personal transportation or getting urgently needed supplies. In this episode, we hear from Bruce and Zach as they share their personal journey to joining ITEC and the work they are now doing in mission transportation. Now here's your host, Jim.
Zach, Bruce, thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
Thanks for having us.
We're happy to be here.
You know, we've been sitting down with the different areas of ITEC, and there's a lot of components to who we are and why we exist. But today, your department, Mission Transportation, we're going to be talking about that. So maybe Zach can kick us off. What is Mission Transportation? Why is that a department or a function of ITEC?
Yeah. So the Mission Transportation Department as a whole here at ITEC really stems from a historical vision that ITEC has had for a very long time. We are really an aviation group at our roots, but you know, as time has gone on, we're really trying to develop, train, and equip side of things. And so ITEC in the last few years has really been more heavily on the training. And so we feel God has brought our family here to really bring up that develop and equip side, though we do training as well. But it looks a little bit different than the other departments here at ITEC that do the training. So we take more of a transportation approach. And so we look at three different forms of transportation. So that's land, air, and sea. Mm-hmm. And so we're taking on each ministry partner's need and looking at it in a holistic manner as far as the land, air, and sea components, understanding that need, and then coming up with the best solution for that need. And so that can look very different in a lot of different scenarios, and God has definitely outfitted us with some great team members that can complement those needs for sure.
And ultimately, the problem you're trying to solve is how do we get from point A to point B?
Yep.
Often that's in remote areas they're difficult to navigate. So sometimes it's the airway, might be the waterway, or maybe just using some kind of ground vehicle. And that's what you guys are trying to explore, different ways, you know, that you might be able to navigate from point A to point B.
Right. And I think David Platt has said this in the past, that unreached people groups are unreached because oftentimes they're hard to reach. And, you know, that's a great point. And I think that's a lot of where our perspective comes from when it comes to groups needing to expand their means of transportation, maybe modify their means of transportation. And ultimately, our goal is that if we're able to equip them and in their need, then they're more effective at their ministry. And obviously that is centered around the gospel. So it expands their reach and their effectiveness.
Yeah. I mean, historically, you know, Steve Saint founded our organization. His father, Nate Saint, was one of the 5 missionaries in Ecuador using aviation to get into a hard-to-reach location. Historically, people might think of the Maverick as another tool that ITEC has come up with to work on point A to point B. And if you've been following ITEC for a little while, you might have seen a lot of UAVs, or UAS. Is that the proper way to say it, Zach?
Well, I mean, UAS is the commercially recognized, so it's unmanned aerial systems.
Right.
But we call it a UAV, which is an unmanned aerial vehicle.
Or drones? Would that be
Different?
Drones are different. And so I think there's a very poignant, thanks for bringing this up, difference between the two. So Bruce is probably one of the best drone pilots I know. Yeah, he's really good. So he flies a quadcopter. The audience is probably familiar with quadcopter, takes really great pictures. Mm-hmm. But when we're talking about UAVs, now a drone can be a UAV, but we're talking about more fixed wing vehicles that are able to carry a payload, be it medicine, audio Bibles, gospel track information, rice, medicines, whatever it is, and then bring it out to a specified area and drop it off as per that ministry and their needs.
Yeah, again, just point A to point B,
Yep.
trying to solve problems, figure out ways to help accomplish that. And for the people that might be working in those difficult contexts. So that's mission transportation. I think maybe we'll dive more into that, but I think for the listeners, I think it's important to dive into who you guys are. And maybe they don't know Bruce or Zach. And so maybe we'll start there. How did you guys join ITEC? And Zach, you've kind of teed us off. Maybe Bruce, how did you get involved with ITEC?
So years ago, I got married to my wife Jen, and I was just trying to find a good career to get into. It kind of just started as that, and I've always been a Christian, grew up in a Christian household, and so I just wanted to provide in the right way for my family. And flying was something, I'm the first pilot in my family, so it was something a little far-fetched in my head. I wanted to kind of be a firefighter, or I even went for underwater welding, but things just didn't work out financially and stuff, and it just didn't work. So I was like, what's going on, God? And so my wife turned to me and was like, what about piloting? And I was like, whoa, that's expensive, and I don't know if I'm smart enough, and, had all those doubts. And so I was like, well, I'll go check it out. So I went to the local airport up in Jacksonville, Florida, and I did a little research, and I was like, oh, I can pay as I go. So this is different. So I started on my journey with that, took my first flight back in, I think it was 2008, logged my first hour, and I still was like, well, what am I going to do? There's a lot of avenues in aviation, What am I going to do? And my parents were kind of purpose-driven. They were in the helps ministry, serving people in the church and outside the church. So I kind of had that instilled in me early. So I was like, well, God, what do I do? And I didn't really know about missionary aviation at the time. So I felt God laid it in my heart, like, you're gonna use aviation as a tool. And I'm like, well, how? So I did some research. I found MAF and JARS and all those. I dug in, and I was just like, wow, not only is that really cool, I want to go out in the jungles and fly, stuff like that. So I was like, I'm adventurous. That seems like something I would do, and God put it on my heart. Well, then this is going to be your journey. I really had no clue how to get there. So I just started flying a lot. And like I said, I got like 2-3 jobs and just started paying for it as I went. And things just started happening. I got off track a little bit on the way. But ultimately, I was, I guess I could tell a little bit about this story, but we converted a school bus into a home. Long story short, we traveled for a few years on that, lived full time. And a year and a half prior to being at ITEC, I had filled out an application. I loved what ITEC was about and the approach to missions. And I read Steve's books, and I loved the Maverick, and me and my dad were all about that. So I just filled out the application to see what happened for the AMP. At the time, we had iFly program.
Yep. Yeah, which was an A&P apprenticeship program where the goal was to not only allow people here in the U.S. to gain the experience, to go onto the mission field, but internationally for people to gain that experience. And you were one of the first people to join that program.
Yeah, there was a few guys ahead of me, and we still had some kinks to work out and different things. But yeah, so we were living in this bus, right? And it was cool. It was adventurous, and I was still flying kind of pecking at trying to get my commercial and building my hours and all that. So as a prerequisite for a missionary pilot, you need A&P, which is airframe power plant mechanic license, because if you're out in the field, you got to be able to fix your aircraft. So,
that makes sense.
So I was after that, and I didn't know how that was going to happen. So I filled out the app for ITEC, and I was kind of denied that year and a half before.
That's because you lived in a bus.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
No.
They didn't know. They didn't know what to think about that.
No.
Who's this guy?
That's right.
I wasn't dirty.
What's
Yes.
your address? No.
Yeah, I don't have an address, Jim. I don't know what to do.
No. I think at the
But-
time it was full, but
Yeah, so it was full. So I really didn't think much about it. I just kept flying, and I kind of forgot about that. I filled the app out, and I was kind of just on my journey to maybe go with the bigger organizations eventually. So I was kind of in the middle of a life crisis. I didn't really know where I was going, what I was doing, how it was going to happen. And I got a call from a 352 number, which is out here in Marion County. And I was like, who is this? And it was Jim Tingler. And he was like, hey, are you still interested in the program? And that's how God works. Right at the last minute, you're in a crisis. It's like then he's going to send you. So the next day I was here, and I took a tour. I met Troy and Jim and Jamie and all, and that was the end of that. I took a couple weeks, trained a little bit with Jesse Saint out there, and it was a fit for everybody. Mm-hmm. And I came on for my 2.5 year apprenticeship, and I was getting towards the end, and I went out. I was looking for some other organizations to work with. I was ready to go. And so I went out to Guatemala, and I had a chance to fly with a guy down there, Luke Sullivan, and it was an awesome journey, an awesome flight. We were scoping out some airstrips out there for pastoral trainings where they were going to go and stuff. And unfortunately, on the way back, we crashed out there, and so pretty much I woke up 2 months later in Texas, 70% burned. Found out Luke had passed, and I was like asking God why, all those questions come up when something like that happens. So it was about a 2-year recovery, and I was just in the middle again of like, what am I going to do with my life? Mm-hmm. I was finally getting back on my feet, back to life, and I was at the air show at Sun and Fun, and I saw Zach and Jamie called me, and they're like, hey, what do you think about maybe a position back at ITEC on the team for mission transport? And I was like, what? Me? Why would you pick me? So I wind up coming here for another week and kind of talking with Zach and training and looking to see if I was even capable of doing this. And they were like, hey, well, yeah, we'll help you along. We want to see you recover, and we'll kind of help with that. And so I was like, okay, the answer was yes. So I came back on, and it wound up, I'm a year in. I finished my A&P in commercial pilot, and I'm back flying powered parachutes, which got me back up in the sky for now. Pilot-wise, I don't know what journey that has for me for the future, mission-wise, but for now I'm working on the ground as a mechanic. And that's kind of where I'm at here
helping
at ITEC.
out.
Yeah,
There's a lot of components.
And doing the UAV thing and all that. So it's been a real blessing to be back here, kind of where I started, but in another level.
Right.
Yeah.
And you went through that story very quickly, but man,
there's a lot more to that.
There's a lot to that.
Yeah.
And actually we did another podcast that if somebody's listening could maybe go and find it. It goes a little bit more into that story,
Right.
But in short, you felt called into mission aviation. So you start taking steps in that journey that led you to ITEC that seemed like, all right, God, this is making sense. An opportunity for Guatemala opened up. You were taking that step of faith and exploring that, and there was an accident down there.
Yeah, things, as you walk the earth for a long time and you have God by your side, sometimes, most of the time it's not picture perfect.
Right.
God just doesn't fix everything. We are fragile beings, and things happen.
Right.
And I found that, throughout the recovery, I was like, where's my miracle? Take the pain and all this. Well, the miracle was I survived, and God still has something for me. Obviously, I'm back here.
Right.
So the journey continues. It looks
Yeah.
a little different,
Sure.
and sometimes that happens, but God is always with you.
And
through that.
just for the context of that recovery, what percentage of your body was burned?
It was almost 70% burned, third degree and up. My hand got really burned down to the bone, and I don't even know what you would call that type of burn, but
Yeah.
so it was pretty severe.
Yeah.
Like I said, it took about 2 years. I was in the hospital 11 months, another about a year plus of therapy and recovery and learning to walk again, all that stuff. So.
And you were in a burn specialty center in Dallas for a period before moving to
Parkland.
Shands
Yep.
and at UF in Gainesville for a season as well.
Yeah, so I was in Parkland. That's where Kennedy went, actually. So they've been there a long time, and I was really blessed that they sent me there because it's one of the top burn units in the world. And they really, I think if I would have went anywhere else, I may have passed. I don't know, but they did an excellent job. And then I wound up flying first class on an airliner, all wrapped up, still wounded, back home. I wanted to get back home, so we got to a point where I could. Then I went going back into UF, Shands, and Gainesville for another 4 months back and forth with surgeries and all. But it all led me back
to here. And
yeah.
the Romans 8:28, God working all things together for good. Sometimes it's easy to read and say we believe it, but for you in that journey, I know it's been very difficult. And we also continue to just lift up the Sullivan family and Luke,
Yes.
and who was the pilot who died in that crash down there in Guatemala. So it's heavy stuff. We're thankful for you, Bruce, and the journey and the testimony that you've had. But I think it's a reality as well that this is not without error. It is difficult to get in and out of these places, and mission aviation, there are complications that can happen, and all the more reason to take this seriously, to explore all means of transportation, and kind of goes back to the heart of what you guys are trying to do, to equip those with the best tools for their context. So,
Absolutely.
but well, thanks Bruce.
Yeah.
And so Zach, what brought you to ITEC, and maybe kind of that journey of mission aviation and that heart for that?
Yeah. I just want to share something. I'm not sure Bruce probably remembers this. Just talk about your story and kind of walking down memory lane a little bit. But when we toured here in 2019, I went and was asked to stay for the week. Hey, why don't you just kind of stay for the week, see how things are looking here at ITEC between you and your family and ITEC, and see if it's a good fit. Well, I actually worked with you, Bruce, on our Cessna 172.
Yeah.
And
We're still working on that.
we're still working on it right now. That's been a journey, and we're really excited. We see the light at the end of the tunnel with that airplane. We're super excited. We really feel like God is building up right now this department for big things. So we're really excited to see the opportunities come forth. We're stepping out in faith that God will provide those partners. And so anyways, part of you coming on, partly might have been nostalgia for me too. I'm like, hey, I worked with this guy. He was really cool. Great work ethic. And, if you can survive as much as you've survived with that much heart for life, if I can have if you can bring an ounce of that to ITEC, I said, I want that guy.
Yep.
I want that guy on the team.
For sure.
And, praying about it and seeking God on that, we obviously laid that at his feet and felt peace about the situation. So we're really happy to have Bruce here. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, sorry.
No.
Just wanted to explain to the audience just how great God is in that. So, anyhow, our story. So, my wife, Faith, and I, we have 5 children. Our oldest is 12 all the way down to 3. So if you can kind of guess the age gap there.
A full house.
The full house.
Yeah.
And so I myself, I was raised in a religious household, and I always tried to be a pretty good guy. Didn't do the bad things that most people did in high school. Morally, I say, I was a pretty good guy. Oh yeah, I think I'm good. And then I came to realize that my morality isn't gonna cut it. And I ended up finding that out when I was about 18 in a Bible study youth group there in Michigan, where I grew up. The audience might be familiar with Ludington, Michigan, pretty close to there. So very small town type scenario where I grew up. But anyhow, kind of fast forward, I was on a mission trip in the Bahamas, and God got a hold of my heart and was knocking very loudly. And actually, it was the youth group leader's daughter came to me and said, "Zach, it's time to accept Christ." And the next thing I realized, I'm on my knees weeping and recognizing my sin before him and my desperate need of Jesus. And so shortly after that, I really had a prompting, and I really had a vision, to explain it, of myself flying an airplane, and the pastor that happened to be there on the mission trip that we were on, he was in the airplane and I was flying him. And I went, what is this? And so I started thinking about it and praying about it. I actually explained that to the pastor, and he said, well, maybe you're supposed to be a missionary pilot. And I'm like, I love aviation, since I was a little kid. I see an airplane, look up. And so I went, but what's a missionary pilot? So I went back home and went on something called Google, which was existed at that time. Pretty new, actually. And looked up missionary aviation, and Mission Aviation Fellowship came up, and it just became this journey of seeking God on that, looking at schools, and ended up going to Laterno University through their program there, where I graduated with a degree, bachelor's in aeronautical science and flight science. But really, it was the main goal and heart was missions, and Laterno really grounded me with really a great biblical approach towards all of that, and some great leaders there that had been in missions previously, and instilling a passion for the Great Commission amongst aviation. And so kind of keeping the story going, 2010 in fall 2010 I graduated, and at that point we had our oldest son. My wife worked at Starbucks as a barista, and so we were thankful for the little income that we made there, and ended up finding a job in Idaho, and in Caldwell, Idaho, which is near Boise. And I worked as an aerial photography pilot, where I could looking for a job where I could be both a pilot and a mechanic, and keep those skills up, as missionary aviation groups want those two skills, and they want you to keep up with both. And so flew there for about 3.5 years, saw a lot of the western part of the U.S., great flying experience. And then we kind of took a step back after 3.5 years, and we had a hard reality of understanding that our student loan debt wasn't going to be paid off in probably 20 years at the rate we were making money. And I think around that time, we had our second son, Elias. And so we're starting to get a full household, and we sought some godly wisdom on, okay, so what should we do? And that godly advice actually was a guy from Laterno, worked in Boise. And he said, I hate telling you this, but the current market in aviation, it's not going to pay enough, and if it does, you're going to be gone a lot, and that's not good for a young family. So we sought the Lord. We said, God, will you please provide an income? and he put a figure in front of us, and it was pretty intimidating. But lo and behold, some friends from church invited us, or myself, to go work with the husband and family. And we were working in food and beverage plants. And I said, well, I think I can help out. I'm a mechanic. I know how to, which end of the wrench to hold and, which end of the screwdriver to hold. And so it's actually started a 5-year journey where I got out of aviation, didn't quite understand, what God had in store, but was thrusted into a new industry that I really knew nothing about. God started pulling things out of me in that job that I never knew were giftings, which is amazing. When you trust God in a situation and it's not on your own strength, you start seeing God bringing things out in you that you're like, I never knew I could do that. And so that was a 5-year journey and a commitment that I made to him, and ended up working my way through that job as just a mechanic and then a foreman. And then from there, project manager, and got to use a lot of design, the design in AutoCAD. I don't know if the audience is familiar with AutoCAD, but, understood fabrication and a lot of those things. And I said, well, what am I going to use this for? I'm a pilot mechanic. And, well, God doesn't use, just like Bruce, I firmly believe this, in his story, God doesn't use the things that he puts us through and just means it for nothing.
Mm-hmm.
He has something else planned for us. And sometimes, when you're in the middle of the journey, it just feels like you're in the desert, and it's really difficult. And you just, you need that refreshing sense that, hey, I'm where God wants me to be. And, to come through, to persevere, and to recognize, hey, God had a purpose and a plan. And after that 5-year commitment was up, God made it very evident I was to leave. And we just happened to be in Michigan for a funeral. In fact, my mother passed away in 2019, so we were there for that. So it was a hard time, but I was still working for the food and beverage company at the time. And my boss calls me up and says, hey, I have a job here in Florida, which I have to say previously, God was actually leading us towards ITEC through some friends at church. And he actually said, hey, you want to get back into aviation, but your heart's in missions. He said, you have to be true to that. God called you.
Mm-hmm.
And I was saying, you know what? I have great experience. I can make a decent living for my family and be comfortable. And he was saying, no, God called you. Be obedient. So we started pressing into that. And he said, you know what? There's a really great group. I worked kind of near them in Shell, Ecuador. They're called ITEC. You should check it out. And the Lord called us to see ITEC. So fast forward, we're in Michigan, driving home basically to Idaho. And my boss calls up at the time and says, hey, I know this is a hard time for you. I'm in Miami. I'm in desperate need of your help. I had a guy I had to send away, and I'm a guy short. Would you be willing to come down to Miami to help out? And I looked at my wife, Faith, and I said, this is God providing for us to go down to ITEC to check it out. And Jim, I don't know if you remember that week when I showed up, some crazy things were going on.
Yep. Well, yeah, it was a very interesting week for ITEC. We had one of our team members, Aaron, who, he was a pillar kind of in this mission transportation world, and UAV was leaving and with his family, kind of moving to the next chapter of their life. And we're like, what are we going to do? And it was, I believe, the same day that they pulled out.
Same day, yeah.
Zach rolls up. Hey, guys, just checking you out. So it's more than coincidence that things like that have happened through time.
Right. Yeah, and that's for us, looking into missions, and I'm not sure God could made it any more clear and evident just through the there are no coincidences.
Right.
Through his sovereign working. So,
right.
Yeah. So,
and so invited you to check it out for a week, and the rest is history. So,
That's right.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, God definitely provided our way to come down, and yeah, we're really excited to be here.
Yeah.
2.5 years in, excited to see what God has in store.
Yeah, for sure. So it's exciting, I think, for what is in store for Mission Transportation. He's forming the team. He's got you guys here. And for those listening, what role can you play in maybe guiding somebody through finding what the best solution could be? What might that look like, and contacting you and working with you?
Yeah. So a lot of times when we have groups come to us, they have maybe a presupposed idea of what they would need. And what we don't want to do is have a presupposed idea of really what they need. We want to hear their need fully and then understand the aspects involved. So when someone contacts ITEC and has an interest in our maybe UAV program or even flight training, or has a transportation need that they need solved, we basically go through a vetting process where we ask very specific questions and have some paperwork that they will work through, or I'll just ask very poignant questions on what are the very specific intricacies of their need. Sometimes they don't fully understand even their need until we start asking those questions.
Right.
So in that regard, we want to be here as an advocate. We want to be here to collaborate. We desire to be on the side of that missionary partner,
right,
and really on their team, right, and fighting for them and helping them come up with the right solution.
Right. Yeah, and in the heart of what we're doing, again, understanding the need, looking at the resources that they have on hand. And our goal, the core of ITEC and why we got started, goes back to training national Christ followers and those that are working in that context, and maybe helping them see ways that they can work with those national Christ followers they hadn't thought of before. And so there's a lot of different aspects. We're not a sending agency. And I think, like you're saying, the presupposition somebody might have, well, okay, what we need a turnkey operation. Well, maybe, or it could be other areas. And that goes back to the consulting, and you've done that with several organizations and continue to.
Yeah, I think sometimes, we get interest here at ITEC in the Mission Transportation Department, and people say, well, can I send my grandson to you guys to become a missionary pilot? And, that needs to have very specific context for us to take on that need. There are a lot of great schools.
That's not our objective.
That's not our objective here. Yeah. So, but we know the great schools that are out there, and some of those people are dear friends of ours.
Right.
And we're really happy to point people in the right direction. But what we're looking at too, like as far as aviation goes, is really that, in essence, like a preacher pilot or someone who's a missionary in a very specific area, and they need more of an outside of the box scenario or type of a tool.
Right.
That might be like a light sport aircraft.
Right.
Or even could be a powered parachute. So,
so tell me more, and maybe Bruce, you could speak into this. What is a powered parachute?
So a powered parachute is usually a 1 or 2 seat, pretty much a go-kart that flies.
Okay.
So it has a parachute. You lay it down behind it. You pretty much have an engine, big fan on there, a couple seats, and as you throttle up, the wing comes up and you can fly, and usually take off when within probably at tops a couple 100 feet.
Mm-hmm.
So the application can be very good in different scenarios, coming in out of small like soccer fields or anything like that. Now you can't carry a whole lot, but I think we had a guy.
How much can you carry, I guess, is the, just to give some perspective.
So the one I fly is like a 350 pound payload. So a couple big people could get in there, or I could have the rear seat. I could stick a package or something if I needed to fly, something like that, or extra gas if I'm going long range to get somewhere.
Yeah, I just think of like, potentially that could be like a rice bag, for instance.
Right.
Sure. It could be like a maybe a small generator. I just kind of thinking about, what are the use cases of this.
Right.
But yeah, keep going, Bruce.
So yeah, you have to keep it in the safe CG and weight load, just like any aircraft. So they're fair weather flyers. So you have to pick some pretty perfect days. Either fly them early in the morning, late in the afternoon. You don't really want to hit thermals in the middle of the day. It could kind of collapse your wing and stuff. So powered parachute, the application has to be very specific.
Right.
But
they're fun to fly.
Right.
But what do you see then, Bruce, as like the powered parachute? Why is it a valuable tool, I guess, then to our department? Because I think it would be. I want to hear your perspective because you fly them right now.
Right.
I'm hoping to do it someday to get my powered parachute.
We'll get you there.
Yeah.
So for one, they're fairly cheap to purchase. Very cheap to fly, fuel-wise, and very easy to maintain. So when you're looking at aircraft, those things are a real attractive. It's very attractive for somebody that may be able to use that in a setting like in the jungles or really anywhere. So the application here, it's good to build these hours. It's just another, like Zach was saying, we don't really train pilots. We're not a training facility, but these tools and this knowledge we gain. So if somebody comes to us with a need, this may be a solution. So we try to think about that in the broader aspect in the future of missions of, what's going to be possible, what may be needed. So we just try to collaborate and come up with these solutions, and that somebody may come again in the future that may need that type of training. So we want to have that available.
Sure.
And be readily available with that.
Again, sometimes you have this idea of we need this.
Right.
And I was thinking of Glenn Chapman, and he was working in Africa in the Congo, right? Was that?
Yeah.
And so he was going in, flying to different villages and showing the Jesus film.
Right.
And so using a powered parachute was able to do that. And so minimal startup costs, minimal, cost to run it on a regular basis, but was still able to do that on a regular basis. And I think that's what's important in thinking outside the box. It doesn't always have to look like this specific aircraft. Another component of using a powered parachute is it's a short takeoff, short landing.
Right.
So, about the length of a soccer field.
You could really, you could, you need to have some skills, and you gotta have the knowledge of weather and all that stuff, obviously. But yeah, safely you can come in out of a soccer field, especially with something like I have 2 seats, pretty light.
Sure.
They do get bigger and heavier and things like that, so you take all that in account. But yeah, that's.
Well, I just want to point out too, like, as he's talking about powered parachute, so I'm not a powered parachute flight instructor right now. But we do have another team member here, Troy Townsend, who is. And so at this current time, if there are people who are interested in using that tool of a powered parachute, we can provide that training. And so, we really want to look outside of the box because we believe that there's really niche or niche areas around the world where they're underserved as far as aircraft being able to come in and out of those areas. And even for that missionary, potentially it's an area that maybe there are people flying in and out, but they have a specific purpose.
Sure.
Maybe it's going around, flying around and visiting churches.
Yep.
You know, so there's a lot of different scenarios. The other great thing about the powered parachute is it's low entry to training as well. You can take someone with fairly limited experience and knowledge. I think we talked about Tomenta before.
Sure. Yep.
One of the Waudanis.
Which was probably the first
Very cool.
example of an ITEC mission transportation consulting and training.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's so important to share that story here in this context too, because Tomenta is just such an inspiration for our department.
Right.
To see, someone from the Waudani tribe, the Waudanis chose Tomenta and said, "Hey, we want you to be our pilot." And so, I mean, this is what, 12 years ago now?
At least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Tomenta came up here to Florida with the ITEC Ecuador director, Galo Ortiz.
Yep.
And Galo actually trained him here with powered parachute. It's actually above our heads on the mezzanine.
Right.
And so if you're coming here to ITEC, it's the blue one
Yep.
up there. But it was heavily outfitted. And but what was amazing to see is that you're able to take someone who just is a very intelligent person, but maybe didn't have the education that here in the West we would think someone would need in order to be competent. But Tomenta was extraordinarily competent, very intelligent person, and in fact flew for 2.5 years
Down in the jungles of Ecuador.
down in the jungles of Ecuador, no accidents. So
yeah, and maybe even that path to being able to become a pilot, and so walking, Gallo and Steve and the team walking with Tomenta along that journey, which again goes back to when Steve was asked by the Waudani, they wanted him to move down there at the time, the mid 90s, and Steve asked them, well, what do you want me to do? There's already missionaries in the area that can provide some of the needs that you guys have. He said, well, we don't want you to do anything. We want you to teach us.
Right.
And one of the things they wanted to learn how to do was fly airplanes. And so that was a part of the process of rethinking what might this look like. And so he tried several different aircrafts and chose the powered parachute as the best solution for that context. And even really a lot of the inspiration for the Maverick you can
Right.
see.
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
So,
yeah, absolutely.
so yeah, there's a lot to this field, and will continue to be, and I'm sure there'll be plenty more stories that we'll share along the way. But is there anything really exciting you'd like to share that you guys are working on, or maybe save that for another day?
Like Zach was saying, when we first met, I was out there digging into a Cessna 172 that ITEC, I guess it was donated, and it was sent down to Ecuador, painted and stripped apart and all this. So here I am as a up-and-coming AMP. It arrives, and they just throw a big box of parts, and so it was crazy. But so I had to sort all this stuff, and as a man, you open a box, you don't want to read the directions, and you just want to put it together. Well, no,
It doesn't work that way.
You have to. So I learned a lot in that project, but in the midst, in 2019, Zach came along, and that's what he was helping me on for that first week he was here, was that 172. And then come full circle, there was some things we found, major things, corrosion and stuff, and it kind of put to the wayside with some other projects. But when I got back here, we pulled this sucker out of the corner, and we are working on that same 172, and it is almost fly-worthy right now. So that's I think, very exciting for us.
We're hoping in the next, I would say, couple weeks, we're hoping for the airworthiness inspection.
It should be flying as an ITEC trainer bird. And that's exciting, and just the fact we were both working on it way back.
Yeah.
So
you've got some airplanes as resources, or
Yep.
the powered parachute, the airplane, but also some drones that you guys are working on as well.
Yeah, so the UAVs, I definitely wanted to share about that before we got off. We just recently went to a big conference, and it's called AUVSI is the group, Exponential Conference here in Orlando.
Okay.
Bruce and I attended. A lot of what we're running into right now is a lot of missions groups look at the UAV and it's very intimidating. It's a very intimidating platform because of the context of the country that they're working in. It could be that there's a lot of hesitancy from the country and the regulatory agencies that are there, and they don't understand how do we step forward and use these. They may see these as valuable tools, which we do as well. I mean, we believe that these are going to be very valuable tools here in the near future.
It's not an if, it's when.
It's when.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's not an if, it's a when. And so we really feel like, in a way, in the missions community, we're kind of on the tip of the spear. It's a very exciting and sometimes intimidating place to be. But we definitely believe God has called us here. We want to see these implemented. And so we're looking into ways in which we can alleviate some of those concerns from our ministry partners. And so we're looking at international accreditation, training as far as getting our partners certified in flying these UAS systems, and then as well coming up with components on board with the aircraft where these can actually function in airspace with manned aircraft, be able to function in that regulatory agency that regulates the airspace will be comfortable with these flying around. But, we want people to view these as another tool, another vehicle. They're really cool. It's really fun to see them fly, and it's awe-inspiring. But we want to see these almost in a way like a motorcycle.
Okay.
Do I fire up the motorcycle and ride 3.5 hours, or do I send up the UAV to bring this package? And so we're working on some really exciting batteries as well that we're hoping to double the range of both vehicles.
Okay.
So our two vehicles are the Believer, and the ITEC Flying Wing, or the Flying Wing. And right now the Wing carries 3/4 pound up to 40 miles out autonomously and back.
Okay.
And we're hoping to double that range with these new batteries. And so with the Believer is built around an IV bag. That was the inspiration behind it. It's right around 1 kilogram of payload, but the box is rather large. So I would say it's like a small Amazon box, which is, it's actually 4.5 by 4.5 by 9 inches interior. But we're really excited about this one because the new batteries will help us double the range as well. So we're looking at 40 miles out and back with that vehicle. And really, we're focusing on automation as well and usability for the user. So they'll have the base knowledge and the training here. We'll provide the training to them on operating the vehicle, but as more automated it can be, the easier it is to operate. So,
how long do you think before we see this in the States, as far as drones delivering packages, or before that becomes a normal thing that we're seeing, or will it ever?
Well, it's a good question, Jim. I don't think there really is a date or timeline for that, but right now, when we went to Exponential Conference, there was a lot of great technology and all this, but it was mostly about regulation. So there needs to just keep like us and the other industries just keep pushing FAA and the boundaries of all that, because nobody knows what this is and what it's going to look like, right? You think that would already be set up, but it's kind of getting close. But
so, for instance, there is a group called Zipline. Our audience might be familiar with them. Really interesting and great setup that they have there. And they're
So where are they operating again?
They're operating.
I know they're in Africa.
They're in Africa. I don't remember the exact country, but they're operating with the government directly and delivering plasma blood out to different hospitals. So they're basically a center hub, and then they send it out to clinics and hospitals, with government contract. But they're also, they were used, I believe, in North Carolina or South Carolina. There was a corridor that was set up, and they're able to fly here in the U.S. Mm-hmm. And so there's it's kind of a big...
It's happening.
It's something called BV loss, which I know pilots, we love our acronyms.
Sure.
I mean, we love them. But it's beyond visual line of sight.
Okay.
So there's a rule right now with the FAA, you cannot fly beyond visual line of sight. But the FAA is beginning to allow BV loss waivers and allowing different groups to fly beyond the line of visual sight.
So it's not really the technology that is holding things up. It's more of managing airspace.
Yeah.
How are we going to keep, airplanes safe? And now you've got consumer drones flying up there too. And,
I anticipate, I'm pretty excited about the possibilities here in the U.S. I anticipate that, we could see it within the next 3 to 5 years. I would say 5 years is more of a reality.
Okay.
But, that in Europe right now, they're actually flying actively and delivering packages.
Oh, okay.
And one of the means by which they do that is they use 4G LTE to have constant communication with that vehicle, so they know where it's at, what's happening. They even have cameras on board. So that's kind of the complication we have here.
Are they delivering food yet? Can I get a pizza delivered to my front door? Or?
Yeah, I don't
know.
If I was in that place where it's functioning, or is this mainly just packages?
I think right now what they're delivering is it's actually a VTOL, which is another great acronym, vertical takeoff and landing. Okay. VTOL. Okay. It's a VTOL aircraft, so it actually takes off vertically like a quadcopter and then flies forward like an airplane. And so this is actually coming in and landing, and then it's medical supplies that are inside the vehicle.
So what about my commute to work? When will I see that? Something that I can just VTOL it to work.
The technology's there for that. Like we see places like Dubai where they're super ahead of the game.
Yes.
That stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's there. It's just regulations and just like any aircraft, new aircraft manufacturer comes around, it takes time to get that approved and into the market. So same thing with that.
Well, I think a lot of too what's going on, not just regulation but the technology. Mm-hmm. It's really exciting. There's obviously we're coming into some new batteries as well, but the problem right now is energy density. So it's like, how much energy can you fit within a battery? Okay. Right? Okay. It's like how much, it's like if you think about fuel, you have a higher octane fuel, right? For the amount of gas you put in your tank. So your engine has a higher horsepower. Kind of the same thing. So I would say probably I could fly to work because I live a lot closer than you.
Right.
and there are some pretty cool vehicles. You can find them on YouTube if you look up VTOL.
Oh, I've seen some. Well, I haven't looked up VTOL, but I've just I forgot how I got on it. But you could get on a rabbit trail with anything on YouTube. But quadcopters, quadcopters I can ride on, motorcycle style.
They have some that are really cool, and they're almost set up to be like racing vehicles. And so, I'd love to get one of those and have that be my commute to work. That would be pretty cool.
It is really exciting to see technology continue to progress, but the lens at which you see this is for how does this apply to the mission field?
Yeah.
And so that's what Mission Transportation is trying to bring. Take technology that exists and work with those in those hard to reach locations to try to find solutions to further the gospel.
Yeah. One of the things that one of our partners had said, a good friend of ours, Zach Loving, he was on one of the podcasts, if you remember. Mm-hmm. And I believe he said this in his podcast, and it rings so true to our department. It honors God when we're on the forefront of technology, right? Christians should be there. We should be on the forefront and using that for God's glory. So that is a prudent thing that we should be looking into. And so we believe that this is part of it, right? Mm-hmm. Is driving UAS and UAV systems forward in missions. We want to see these being used as a vehicle to expand the reach and, see the world reach for Christ, right? That's the whole goal. So
good stuff. I think that's a good point to wrap up for today. And so thank you guys so much for the work that you're doing with the Mission Transportation Department. If people are interested, they can go to the website, get more information, reach out to you guys. And thank you so much for just sharing your stories as well. Bruce, I know the journey for you has had plenty of complications. Anybody listening that wants to hear more, I recommend the other interview we did. Might have been 1.5 years ago or so.
Yeah, it's been a little while.
It's been a little while. And Zach, and your journey and the story of you and your family, the leap of faith to come here. You get that?
Oh, yeah.
His wife's name is Faith.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Okay. All right. At any rate.
Yeah.
So great to have you guys, and look forward to the next time you're on.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Been fun.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of Mission Minded. For more information on today's topic and show notes, please visit our website, itecusa.org. Mission Minded Podcast is produced by ITEC. The goal of this podcast is to inspire conversations about Great Commission participation. The views, organizations, and individuals represented, interviewed, and discussed on the podcast do not necessarily represent an official position or formal partnerships with ITEC.